Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining me today is a guest I am super excited to have here on the show, making their official debut. Now, my guest today is an award winning author of historical fiction whose work explores memory, identity, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Her debut novel, Bright One, which I have a copy right here, viewers and listeners, launched a six-part World War II saga inspired by true stories from her own family ancestry. The novel established her as a powerful voice in multi-generational storytelling grounded in rigorous historical research and emotional authenticity. The series continues with Golden Flight, scheduled for release in July 2026, and Aliyah Rising, forthcoming in 2027. The remaining titles in the completed saga include Folding Light, Restoring Hope, and Fading Night. She has completed manuscripts for the entire six-book series, an ambitious literary undertaking that traces the lives, displacement, survival, and rebuilding of her ancestors across pre-war and wartime Europe. Born and raised between Long Island at, and the Catskill Mountains of New York, she was shaped by landscapes of sea and mountain that continue to influence the atmosphere and expressiveness of her fiction. She holds a Master's of Fine Arts from the City University of New York and a Bachelor's of Fine Arts from Alfred University. Her professional background reflects a lifelong dedication to craft and design with experience spanning the fine arts, interior design, metalsmithing, lapidary arts, and the craft beer and hospitality industries. She is an accredited jewelry professional through Gemological Institute of America and a graduate of the Hop and Brew School of Yakima Chief Hops. With an eye of a visual artist and the discipline of an historian, she writes with cinematic scope and layered emotional depth. Her work is driven by a profound commitment to preserving family history and honoring those whose works might otherwise be lost to time. Through richly detailed narrative and immersive storytelling, she illuminates the fragile threads that connect past and present. Now residing in the Catskills Mountains in New York, she continues to write and research while embracing an active life filled with cycling, skiing, and travel with her partner and their standard poodle, Hops. So, without further ado, viewers and listeners, let us give a huge round of applause to our guest today, award-winning author and historian, Lisajoy Sachs. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome, Lisa. I'm so excited to have you here on the show and to learn all about this series of yours. Now, before we begin, I have an icebreaker question, and I don't know if you may be able to answer this because your bio seemed to cover all bases, but beyond your bio and beyond your life as an author and who you are as a person, is there any random facts about yourself that not a lot of people may know about you?
Maybe, I guess. I am let's see, something. So I'm a certified Cicerone beer server. So I have a background in beer service. Cicerone is kind of like a sommelier, but for beer. And the program is very similar. It's a 4-step process, and I have already completed the first step. And my background before I became an author, I was a jeweler. So I have a very strong background in the visual arts, which I carry through into my writing. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that as we kind of get through the interview. But those are, I think, the two things that a lot of people might not know about me.
Nice, Lisa. Nice. Now, as also mentioned in your bio, you are the author of an incredible six-book series that you already have planned for the works. You already have the second book coming out later this year, as well as the third one coming in 2027. Now, without spoiling too much, what can people expect from the introduction of the series, Bright One? What can people expect from this first book?
Well, Bright One is the first of the six-part series. The novel begins before the end of the First World War in Romania, and it centers around my great-grandmother, Yeti Finkelthal. And that first part of the book, she is the protagonist. We go through meeting a lot of the characters that will show up in the next books. As anti-Semitism starts to kind of become more apparent and daily life becomes harder for the family, she has to make some very big decisions on what she's going to do with her daughter. I can give that part away because if she didn't do what she did, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. So that was a really huge part. So the second part of the story starts with the birth of my grandmother, Berta, and how my great grandmother had to make some really hard choices that were so painful and complex that she even struggles to understand them. The first book is kind of a slow burn. I really hope that my readers understand that I needed to sort of write the first part this way to get the emotion that I really wanted to portray about the decisions that she has to make in her future to get her daughter to where she needs to actually be to survive and escape the Holocaust that's impending.
Interesting. Now, before we talk more about, the creation of this series and what sort of sparked, this deep dive into your family history, Lisa, let's talk a little bit more about you as a person. So, growing up, were you always very, very captivated by storytelling, or did that come later in life? And if so, do you have a definitive aha moment that is the stepping stone for you?
So my background was extremely creative. I knew from the first moment I started making things with my hands that I wanted to be an artist. I actually knew exactly where I wanted to go to college, what I wanted to major in. I became a glassblower at a very young age and did that professionally for a short amount of time, and then changed my career over to jewelry. Um, I was unfortunately in a vehicle accident, which ended that part of my career, and I needed to make a decision of what I wanted to do. Now that leads me into my aha moment that you just mentioned. I had to try to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. My grandmother, Berta, died in 2004. She was 96 years old, so she had a very full and beautiful life. But when she died, she left behind some boxes of information. There were letters that were dated back to the early 1900s, even before she was born, from her relatives. And I was still working at the time. I got them. It took me a couple years to go through the boxes and organize everything. And this part of the story is kind of funny, actually. I mean, it's sad, but it's kind of funny. I found a divorce document,
Oh.
and I was terrified to tell my dad about it because I was sort of concerned that maybe he wasn't, like, my grandfather wasn't his dad, and I don't know. So I waited like a week before I told him about it. And so I finally, got him on the phone and I was like, Dad, I found this divorce document. Grandma got divorced. And he goes, oh, yeah, I knew about that. So it was sort of like this realization that I had to do something about all of this stuff that she left, all of this ephemera, these letters. And so he helped me start to translate the letters and the documents. And a lot of them were written in German, a lot of them were in Romanian. And I realized that this wasn't just family memorabilia, it was a living archive. It
Right.
was it was history. It wasn't a history from a book that you could read. It was survival documented in real time. And that was the big turning point for me when I realized and understood the depth of what was sitting in front of me, that I felt a really huge responsibility to do something with it. But I don't have a background in writing. So that was the biggest hurdle that I had to face when I decided I wanted to write my books. Um, this story wasn't a story that could be told. It was a story that needed to be told. And that's when I realized I knew I wanted to write her story. It wasn't until a few years later after my car accident, when I was sort of confined, when I did start actually putting pen to paper or typing into the computer and doing the historical research of matching dates on the letters to what was actually happening
Mm.
in history. And the first part of your question was, you know, I'm not really a writer, so I didn't really fall in love with reading and writing until very late in life.
Okay.
So I feel like a sponge right now. I feel like I'm taking it all in and learning how to do the research and figuring out what it's like to be an author and what I have to do to promote myself and, become part of a much bigger community that is incredibly supportive. That's another thing that I didn't have with my other careers. Everybody was always trying to hide all of their secrets and their knowledge and their marketing and the business tricks and all of the different trade things that happen when you're in the jewelry industry. It's so incredibly competitive, but with writing and the author community, it's so supportive because everybody wants to see everybody else succeed. So it's absolutely incredible.
Nice, Lisa. Very, very nice. Now that kind of leads into my next question. So ultimately, as you and your family were looking over these letters, trying to uncover sort of like the truth and like the history of your family, when you decided to actually, tell their story as well as your story mixed in, ultimately, what was the goal you had for this project initially? And ultimately, what is the promise you made, not just to yourself, but also to readers of World War II stories as well as your family?
Yeah, so this type of story can be very devastating for a lot of people to read familially and also for my readers. So the promise that I'm trying to make to my readers is that I'm going to treat their time and emotions with care.
Hmm.
Um, the first half of my first book, my debut novel, deals a lot with depression, which is really hard for a lot of people to understand unless they've gone through it. And I didn't leave any of the harsh things out, which is important because there's no fluff. It actually feels real and very deeply moving. When somebody opens Bright One, I want them to step into an emotional story that they can relate to. And I promise to kind of guide them through it honestly without sensationalizing the hardships or really softening the truth. And I want them to feel grounded with the characters that are in my stories because these are real people that also had an emotional journey, and they earn the right to have this story told because they're not here to tell the story themselves. This is something that I want readers to trust, that my story isn't going to shy away from these darker parts of history and World War II. And I still want to honor the humanity and tenderness that is inside all of the little moments that I put in the book. So um, I also really think that um, my readers want to feel like they're walking right beside my family members. And I think that my family members that are currently still living have really learned to meet the characters in my books again in a different way. And even my dad said that I had a much different perspective of his mother than he did. And he realizes that my connection to her was so special and so deep. He wasn't surprised at the reason why she left me this inheritance of the ephemera. And I don't know how she knew, but I am doing something with it. It's not just going to disappear.
Beautifully said, Lisa. Beautifully said. Now, as you were jotting down and planning this series of books, what ultimately surprised you when you were writing your debut novel that would lead into the next 5 books?
That was okay. So this was such a gratifying experience. I did not know how to even approach publishing companies. I looked into possibly doing it independently, and that wasn't where I thought my strong point was going to be because I don't have a background in writing. I felt like I really needed a lot more guidance and hand-holding. So I took the very first manuscript and sent it out to 2 hybrid style publishing companies, and they both felt the same way, that the story definitely needed to be told. The geographical area of where Bright One takes place is in Chernowitz, Romania, which is actually Ukraine right now. So the history is kind of repeating itself with Russia invading, and it's very relevant in today's political, events that are happening now. So both of these publishers said, nobody knows who you are. You're a debut author writing a debut novel. It can't be 200,000 pages. I had written an epic novel and didn't realize it. So their suggestion to me was, you can either pare it down or break it up into a series. And at that point, I ended up taking the 200,000 words and knocking it down into 3 books, and then continued writing the 4th one to finalize what I thought was going to be a 4-part series. And then as I did more of the character development, it ended up turning into six novels, and that is part of this series. But one of the other characters in Bright One, my grandmother's cousin Kurti, he is also going to have his own series, and I have about 180,000 words written in that manuscript currently. So I have been incredibly prolific as far as the writing goes for these. So there are going to be 2 book series. And then I also have another little project I'm working on, a side project that is a triple timeline historical fiction time travel novel, which I'm just kind of, putting my fingers on it right now. And that's really based on where the area that I live right now is in the Catskills, and that's where Rip Van Winkle, resided. And so I am trying to incorporate Rip into some of my novels, and there will be Easter eggs that I pop in and out of all of my novels to sort of, tie them all together in some way, so that when my readers do become involved in all of these different series that I'm writing, they can meet a lot of the characters that are going to be peppered throughout the books, trying to make it fun and have fun with it.
All right, Lisa. And speaking of characters, we actually now get into our first fan question of the interview. And one of my viewers would like to know, this is a two-part question.
Okay.
How did you ensure the authenticity of your characters, since a majority of your characters are based upon, real people in your family? So how did you ensure their authenticity throughout not just book one, but also the series as a whole? And secondly, this could be a tough one, may border on spoilers. In the first book, who was your favorite character to write, as well as your favorite scene to explore?
Ah, well, let me answer the first one. Um, as I was doing a lot of the research to figure out who I was going to write about in Bright One, which is the first book, I ended up doing a lot of research using ancestry and MyHeritage. I did a DNA test and found out that I actually have some cousins that are living. I have another cousin that was living in Israel at the time, and reached out to him to see if he knew of anybody else in the family that I could ask questions about. And I ended up finding out that I had these two cousins, one living in New York and one living in California. And then I found out I had another cousin that is a geneticist, and we were able to use his information on his family tree to figure out who my great grandmother's brothers and sisters were. So this would
Right.
be my grandmother's uncles and aunts. I did have to change some of the names of the characters because there are actually two of them that are still living.
Mm,
They're in their very late 90s now. And I kept some of the names accurate, and some of them I did change just because, their direct relatives are still living. And I didn't feel as if it were important to have that information in the books. Now, the second part of the question, that is a really hard one. I want to say Yeti. That's my great grandmother. She probably was my favorite to write about because I knew the least about her. My grandmother didn't really talk about her family very much. She kept a lot of that secret, and I'm not sure if it was because it was too hard for her to deal with. Um, and I'm not going to give too much information because it would be a spoiler,
mm,
but I had to figure out how the relationship between Yeti and Berta worked because I don't have children. I don't know what that feeling of losing a child is like, or even raising a child. So I had to really dig deep and do a lot of research and meditate and try to organize my writing skills in a way that was going to feel very real to my readers. So both of those questions were amazing. Thanks.
no problem. Now, this next one is another fan question, but I definitely think it's probably one of the more difficult ones and may bring up some uncomfortable emotions. So just a little heads up for this one, Lisa. Now, since this book does deal with, your family's ancestral history, and it goes throughout, pre-World War II and of course throughout World War II, I imagine conducting research to try to fill in the gaps was not only necessary, but probably brought up a lot of uncomfortable emotions and possible memories for a lot of those in your family. So, and again, this kind of may border on spoilers, so you can give her as much or as
Okay.
little as you like. But throughout the book series, and we can still say in the first one, Bright One, what chapter was probably the most difficult to write that needed either several revisions, or you knew you had to write it, but you didn't know how best to approach it?
Yeah, so I can actually answer that. I think that the Spanish flu was probably one of the hardest chapters to write. And it's actually called Spanish Flu. And I think part of that, it was very difficult for me because it was so similar to what happened during the pandemic here in 2020. And I had a family member and had several friends that had family members that did die from COVID. So I wanted to really be very careful about how I wrote that chapter, but also not leaving too much of it out. I'm trying not to spoil anything. But for me, that chapter was also really extremely difficult because it is a very emotional part of the book and how it affected Yeti, my great grandmother. I never knew her. I didn't really know much about her until I started to translate some of those documents with my dad. And we actually ended up being able to trace her whereabouts during the war. And I had to sort of work backwards from those documents in time on the timeline and figure out what was historically accurately happening during those times,
Mm.
and then also fit that in with the ancestral knowledge that I had from the family trees. So some of it is made up because I don't know that information, but that's where doing the research and the history of what was happening during those times comes in, and the emotional draw and the emotional pull on that chapter was really difficult, but I also did cry while I was writing it. So I'm hoping that my readers get that.
Absolutely. And on the topic of readers, when you published Bright One, what was the reaction like from beta readers, ARC readers, and readers in general? Were they more positive, very critical, or 50-50?
Um, that's a really good question. I think that my early readers, they really related to some of the characters that I didn't think they were going to relate to as positively. And the first character is Joel. He is my great grandfather. I never met him. Um, from the information that I knew about him from my grandmother, she did talk about him a little bit. Um, she didn't get along with him or his family. He did start another family when he came to America. So he was not somebody that was very likable. And I wanted to portray that in the book, but that's not what the readers were feeling. They felt very sorry for him and really liked him. So I wrote it a way that I thought was going to portray the way my grandmother felt, but the readers actually picked up something completely different, which I found to be beautiful. So there's that. Was there a second part to that question? I apologize.
Oh, no. I think you did answer it. And actually, this goes into a really good fan question, one I haven't asked a lot of authors. What was probably the best review you've ever gotten for Bright One?
Oh, I love this question. It just actually happened a couple weeks ago, actually maybe even last week, and it was a 3-star review, which
Oh,
I
okay.
know it sounds bad, but the person who left the review left a review saying that it was too emotional for her. Um, And the reason is because of how it deals with depression. And I think that was what I was trying to portray in the book, was to not hide those feelings so that it was real and it felt real. And to that person who wrote this review, she said that she could relate to it so much that it hurt. It hurt for her to read it, but she kept reading it. And by the time she finished her review, she said she could relate to the characters. She said that she was really excited when the second part of the book took off. And towards the end, she said she was very excited for the second book to come and she was going to continue reading. But for her, the 3 stars came because it was too emotional for her. And I think
Right.
for me, that's exactly what I wanted to do and exactly what I wanted to write. So I didn't take that 3-star review as a bad review. To me, I took it as a constructive criticism, but also exactly what I wanted to portray in the book. So on the other hand, I've had many 5-star reviews that have said the exact same thing. So it just depends on the reviewer or the person who's rating the book. And I like to make sure that that there is a sort of a warning for people to make sure that they know what's coming and what to expect without a spoiler. So
Very true, Lisa. Very, very true. And this question actually leads into what I like to call the reflective aspect of being an author. Now, this question is a very loaded question, Lisa, so I'll lay some context for it. And that is, of course, being an author in the digital age is not the same as it was being an author 20 or 30 years ago, because hybrid publishing, small press publishing, or indie publishing for a long time was seen as a lesser form of publication by, the big five, the big traditional publishers. But, with the rise of social media and the internet, it changed the landscape. Now, hybrid, small, and indie are at the same levels as trad. Trad's always going to be the most preferred choice for authors, but there are now new options for aspiring authors and aspiring writers. But even with that said, being an author in the digital age is not easy. Yes, there are so many different avenues to publish, but it's so hard to get noticed, which is unfortunately very, very true. We unfortunately leave ourselves open to a lot of the hate speech, negativity, trolls of being an author. Our writer's block is heightened to a degree when people start asking constantly, when's the next book coming? Our imposter syndrome is always at the forefront, where people are saying that, they probably do this with good intention, saying, oh, if you love this author, you're going to love this author. But how we take that is like, should we even be in that same category? It's just a lot to consider. So with that said, Lisa, as you have planned out this 6-book series and already have a launch date for books 2 and books 3, what has still kept you disciplined in terms of staying true to your original goal and mission for this series of books?
I want to tell the story, and this is my legacy. This is what I'm leaving behind. I don't have children. My sister doesn't have children. So our family line basically lives in those letters and those books. We don't have anybody to tell this story to. I'm now telling this story to the world. And in my eyes, that is more important than letting it stay in those boxes and rot when I'm gone.
Well said.
It seems like a pretty simple answer, and I don't really have any other way to express how I feel, how important it is for me to be doing this right now.
Absolutely, very true, Lisa. And I remember one statement that another author said on the show, which they actually borrowed from a video game, and that is, because no one else will. No one
Yeah.
else is going to tell these stories, so it has to be me. It has to be us. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably one of the main core tenets of being an author. That when we have a story, whether it's one we have created on our own or one we have discovered through letters, documents, what have you, there's a story that needs to be told and it needs to be shared. Now, with that said, that kind of now leads to another question, which is more of a debate that I've been seeing in the publishing world. And it is this notion of, are we in a golden age or in an iron age? And I'll give some context for this as well, Lisa. Now, for me, as an author, I've been doing this for about now 5 years. I began writing back in 2020 and published, well, written all four of my books, my COVID books, as I like to call them, but got them published after 2022, 1 year after another, relatively speaking. And as I also was doing the show at the time, now going on 7 years, I realized that a lot of people I was having on the show, especially people who are around my age group or even younger, all began writing during the lockdown. And when things started getting better, a tidal wave just took over. And many people for a long time, including myself, believed that we were in a golden age. But as time has gone on, so has technology. And that has led to the rise of generative AI being used to write books
Yeah.
and everything like that, which has led to this shift of, are we in more of an iron age, in the sense of you have those that are passionate about the industry and want to grow and tell authentic human driven stories, and those who want to get in this industry to make a quick buck, which I'm sure you'll definitely agree is not and should not be the main motivating factor. So in your
No.
opinion, Lisa, do you believe we are in a golden age, or have we transitioned into an iron age?
So I think that I might not be the best person to answer that question because I have such little experience in this field. Um, I signed my contract with my publishing company less than a year ago. So it happened for me really, really fast. I happened to work with a publishing company called Historian Press that really believed in my book and
I
helped
know
me get
exactly
it.
what you're talking about.
Yeah, and helped me get it moving forward, I think, quicker than most. Also because of um, the parallels of what's happening in the Ukraine right now. And I wish I could answer that question. I just don't know because I'm so green still. I'm like a sponge right now. I am taking in so much information about this industry that it's hard for me to wring anything out and actually know if I'm doing it right or if I'm not. I don't know. Um, I'm not familiar with the AI generative. I'm not familiar with that. So, yeah, like I said, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer.
That's fair. That's fair. So now I'm going to go into another question, which I was saving just for this interview because I would really love to hear your thoughts on it. And I was actually talking with another guest on the show last week, World War II historian. And I think this question fits really well with this interview. And it is this notion of World War II history and stories. And the reason I bring this up is that in the history community and in what I've seen in the publishing community, everyone that I've talked with or has written that of all the major events in human history in the last, 100 years, going back to the 20th century, World War II tends to be the main focal point. And a lot of
Mm.
people have argued that World War II has been already talked about so much. It's overly saturated, that we know everything. But in that interview, we did talk that, well, yes, the bigger stories, the same stories have been told numerous times over. There are more personal stories, more intimate stories that need to be shared with the world. So, kind of going back a little bit to a very similar question, ultimately, Lisa, since this book does focus on your family from post World War One into the interwar years, and then ultimately we get into the World War II era of history. As an author and also as a historian, do you believe that just because we may know the major events of World War II or for any history, we should still talk about it because you have those personal stories that play in a much grander scheme.
Yeah, I love this question because my books are set during World War II, but they're not necessarily similar to the most of the books that are set during World War II that are in the concentration camps. My book is set outside of the camps. My family was very wealthy. They lived in a mansion. The entire family lived there. They had servants. These are all parts of what my family, how they lived uh, before World War II, and ended up inevitably losing everything. They went from riches to rags overnight. They were and very few of the World War II stories that are out there are about Romanians. There are maybe just a handful of books about what happened in Transnistria. So some of the stories that I talk about, they're very different than what is your run-of-the-mill World War II stories. I'm not discrediting those stories. I need those stories to tell my story because without them and without the other authors out there telling that part of what was happening, I wouldn't be able to tell my story. I think also the second book that's coming out in July is more of a YA journey story or adventure story. My grandmother, while she wasn't directly part of the Holocaust, she escaped the Holocaust. She wasn't um, uh, typically what they would call a survivor because she wasn't in the camps. So this part of the series, the Bright One series,
Mm.
deals with all of the stories and all of the things that happened to my grandmother outside of the camps and how she ended up traveling and escaping because of the sacrifices that her mother made. Like I said, I don't want to spoil too much, but my great grandmother, Yeti Finkelthal, did not survive um, the Holocaust. She was definitely put in the camp situation. So when I do finish that book, that story is going to be based on inside the camps, not outside of the camps. So it depends on who the character
Mm.
in or the protagonist in which book of the series is will either be in the camps or not in the camps. Um, so it's I think it's important for these stories to continue. I think that a lot of younger people don't really understand the nuances and the emotions of what actually happened. And I think they have to continue. I don't think that we should stop. I think that we really need to continue the stories. Everyone is different in a different way, and everyone will uh, reach a different reader a different way.
Well said, Lisa. Well said. And now that kind of leads into the business side of being an author, which I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on. Now, as a little icebreaker for this segment of questions, once you'd publish, Bright Ones and working with your publisher on marketing, what really surprised you about that aspect of being an author? And as you plan out book two, book three, and the rest in the 6-book series, is there anything you plan to do differently for those books that you wished you'd done for book one?
Oh, I think that I was a little bit naive when I created my ARC team. And for those of you who don't know what an ARC team is, it is an advanced reader uh, copy team, people that you provide an ebook to that read the book that will potentially leave an advanced review. Um, so that when the book does release, readers can sort of get an idea whether it's a good fit or not. I just assumed that everybody who I gave an ARC copy to was going to read the book. Now, I think with the second book that's coming out, I'm going to review my ARC team people, because I think that a lot of reviewers that love like young adult romance, my books are not going to be a good fit for them. So
Right.
they might not be able to relate to the characters. And one of the things about having advanced readers is we want them to leave truthful and honest reviews. So I think that that fit has to actually be good, because somebody who doesn't like this type of historical fiction isn't going to finish reading the book. So I want to make sure that, next time around I do it right. Marketing is very difficult. And
Mm.
this, you probably know the stats. Like 90% of people in the world want to write a book. Out of that 90% of the people, only 3% or 7% actually write a manuscript. And of that percentage, only like 2% of those people actually get published. And then after that, those people might only sell 1,000 books in their lifetime. So the percentages just keep dropping and dropping. And I think the hardest thing is getting your book out there. I am foreseeing myself continually being on book tour. I have 5 events coming up this weekend.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Because I have a background in the beer industry, I have sort of picked breweries as my go-to, and independent bookstores where I actually do readings and signings. And I find that maybe for me, the grassroots, like get out there and sell your book, is the way I need to do it, plus using social media. Um, I might be old school and it might not be the right way, but like I said, I'm very green and this is what I'm doing right now. And this is what's working for me. Since I launched Bright One in October, I have sold over 400 books. And to me, that's a pretty high number based on the statistics that I learned about when I was getting started. So I'm pretty happy with that for right now. And it hasn't been out for a year yet. So I'm hoping and have my fingers crossed that I'll have my first 1,000 books sold within the first year of Bright One releasing. So got my fingers crossed.
Well, that is a good goal to set, Lisa. That is an excellent goal. Now, this next question, I'm very keen to hear your thoughts on as another historical fiction author. And I've gotten kind of differing answers to this question. Now, in your opinion, which should an author approach first when writing historical fiction? Do the research and then write a story from it, or have an idea of the story and base a story around the research?
Well, I know what I did. And I don't know whether it was correct or not. And I've been told that there are 2 types of writers. There are planners and pantsers.
Yes.
And so planners will do a lot of the research first and write an outline and then sort of use that to help them write. And that is not what I did. I actually, believe it or not, I think the 4th to last chapter in Bright One was the first chapter I wrote. And then I actually ended up going backwards and then starting from scratch again to try to fill in all of the chapters that I needed to. And that was going to be the first chapter of the book. And it ended up being 52 chapters. And by then I was all over the place. I'm a pantser. I fly by the seat of my pants. So I will write the story, and then what I usually do is I'll go back and read everything and figure out the dates, and then from the dates that are in the story I will do the historical research and try to figure out how I can incorporate that into the chapters. It might not be the right way, but like I said, I don't have a formal background in writing, so I'm just doing what works for me.
Nice. All right. Now, on the topic of the audience, I always find it very interesting that when writing for an audience, you want to showcase your authenticity, but also understand the market, the genres that we're writing in. So, as you were writing Bright One and planning out the rest of the series, how did you understand the idea of being authentic in your individuality, but also being mindful of the marketability of your book, as it is set in World War II, and World War II books or books centered on World War II, whether that's the home front or more personal stories, tend to be the most preferred in the realm of historical fiction.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't really think that I was thinking about the marketability of the book. I was thinking more about what and how my readers were going to be um, or were going to react towards the emotional part of the reading of the book, and also the immersive cinematic feelings of how I write. Um, because I'm a very visual person, I have a background in 3D. I look at things differently. I see things in great detail. So my style of writing is that way. And my goal was to sort of immerse my readers in what I perceive to see and sense, to use all of the senses in my writing and make it more about emotion rather than the marketing part of the books. So again, like I said, I don't know if that is such a very important part of writing because I don't have the background or the knowledge, but that's the way I write. I write cinematic, I write immersive, I write um, for my readers. I don't really write my story because it's my story. I'm really thinking about what the readers are going to experience.
Absolutely, 100%. And this next question, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on, because I think it's probably one of the most difficult things that every author has to endure. And it's kind of a debate question. Now, in your opinion, Lisa, as you were writing Bright One and then planning out the rest of the series, which did you find to be the most difficult? Knowing when to stop editing, or knowing when to stop writing, in the sense of this is how this book is going to end?
I don't know how to answer that. um, so I have only really experienced the editing process twice now. I'm currently in the middle of my galley copies of Golden Flight, which is the second book in this series. It's so hard. Editing is probably the worst thing ever. Um, it's really, really difficult. And I think a lot of readers may not realize how hard editing actually is. Um, and when to stop writing, there's, especially with historical fiction, there's so much more you can put in. Um, and that's probably why I decided to split up the books into smaller versions so that they're more bite size. I mean, I'm not saying that they're novellas because they still have around 90,000 words in each book, which is still a pretty decent sized novel. It's not an epic novel. I'm trying to keep all of the books about the same size. So knowing when to stop for me was when my characters got to a certain point uh, or made their goal possible. And that in the case of my grandmother. In the case of my great grandmother, unfortunately, she was a victim of the Holocaust, and
Mm.
that basically would be the end of the series. So, and I, like I said, I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, it was obvious that that's the demise of the Finkelthal family. So,
Absolutely, Lisa. Absolutely. Now, as our last fan question, we're going to go into the final question. If you were not writing in historical fiction, what other genre would you like to write in and why?
Um, I like the idea of the time travel novel, but I can't stay away from historical fiction. I love the research part of history. And like I answered earlier when you asked me about, you know, with this something that this was part of my life the whole time, it wasn't.
Right.
So this is still very new for me. Um, Maybe I would probably do nonfiction and maybe Tudor.
Ooh.
I love the Tudor era. I love that whole entire, maybe I'm an Anglophile, I don't know, but I just love the kings and the queens and the princes and all of that kind of. So maybe that I think, this is just on the fly, but yeah, I think that would be kind of fun.
Awesome. Awesome, Lisa. And now we arrive at the final question of this amazing interview. Now, with everything we've talked about and what people can expect from not just Bright One, but the rest of your series, at the end of the day, what do you want people to take away from these books, from this multi-generational story that is your family's story? What do you want readers to take away from it?
I would love for readers to feel like they were part of this story themselves and get a understanding of what it was like for my family to experience what they did. Um, Basically, in a nutshell, the emotion, um, connecting with the characters, and just learning to love your own family and maybe sharing some of your own generational stories between you and your loved ones. I think that's part of why I write as well.
Beautiful, Lisa. Beautiful. And before we wrap up, is there a pearl of wisdom that you would like to send out to the aspiring writers and authors who are watching and listening to this interview right now?
Uh, I think you brought it up earlier about feeling the imposter syndrome. I think
Mm-hmm.
we all get it at some point. I definitely, especially because that writing is not my background, I definitely feel it. However, I have a published book. I did win an award for my book in less than 3 months after it released. So all of these little things that happen, you just have to keep going. Um, you know, there's always going to be moments when you question your own voice, you question your talent, you question your place in the literary world. I even mention it in this interview that, I'm so green. I, don't have enough experience, but those are all those things that basically force yourself to know that you care and it means that you're learning. And if we never stop learning, that's the end of it. You always need to challenge yourself. Step outside of your comfort zone, try a new structure, maybe a different perspective, maybe an emotional turn that you weren't expecting. When you stretch your creativity, something extraordinary can happen. And growth doesn't really happen when you're in your safe zone. That's it in a nutshell.
Perfect. Beautifully said, Lisa. And a perfect ending to this amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another amazing and incredible interview here on the channel. Want to give a huge thank you to Lisa for coming on the show, making her official debut, and hopefully not the last. Hopefully, I can have her back on the show 6 times. Well, actually, 5 times, one for each of the books. And if you'd like to see that happen, you know what you have to do. Like this video, comment down below, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it. where can people buy a copy of Bright One for them to read? And you mentioned earlier that you're going to be doing some appearances later on. Where can people meet you to see you in person?
So I'm going to be this weekend, I'll be in Northern Virginia. I will be at Lark Brewing Company, Old Busthead Brewing Company, Three Fox Vineyards. There's two more places, the Rabbit Hole Bookshop and Cafe in Marshall, Virginia. And one more, where is that? Bear Chase Brewing Company. So that's
Nice.
where I'm going to be this weekend. And then you can find my books pretty much anywhere books are sold. If your local bookstore doesn't carry Bright One, they can order it. I'm also available online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, even Walmart. And if you want a signed copy of my book, you can get it at my website, which is author Lisajoysachs.com. And I'll sign a copy for you, just like I signed one for Gabriel.
Absolutely. And be on the lookout for a review of that book coming very soon. I'll be posting it on my blog and on my YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for that. And I will link all that down below in the description of this video, viewers and listeners. Again, thank you so much for joining us for another amazing, incredible interview here on the channel. A huge thank you to Lisa for coming on the show. I wish her the very best in her journey as an author. And as always, viewers and listeners, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care. Have a wonderful day.